The Leadership Moral Compass, The Values That Guide Us by Dr. Rodney Davis. For the Philippines Professional Linkages from Various Disciplines Incorporated Conference in Puerto Princesa, Palawan, September 15th through the 17th, 2017.
Hi, my name is Dr. Rodney Davis. I am so honored to be one of the conference speakers at this Philippine Professional Linkages from Various Disciplines Conference. I've had the opportunity to speak at many of these events, both in person and electronically, and I consider the staff and presenters among my dearest friends and colleagues. Sadly, I can only be with you this time electronically in Palawan because Palawan is one of my favorite places to visit when I'm in the Philippines. My family and I enjoy exploring the mangroves and the tidal pools at the beach there. It's so relaxing. And I enjoy just sitting on the beach and watching the world go by. Well, I better stop before I spend all of my time talking about where you are and not on my presentation. All of us have a moral compass on which we rely more or less to make decisions and to guide our actions. It's part of us when we're born, and it's developed as we live and grow. Some of us call it our conscience, or that inner voice. It serves to warn us when we're doing something that's wrong, and it lets us know when we're making the right choice. It's a very fragile device, and therefore it can be damaged even to the point of not working anymore. Great care must be taken to keep it in good working order. How do we damage it? If that is the question uppermost in your mind right now, the answer is simply by ignoring our moral compass or value compass and taking actions that we know are wrong and unethical. If we do this enough times, we will strip the gears of the compass and it will no longer function. And that can be a very dangerous place for a school leader or even a classroom teacher. The purpose of this presentation is first to examine how our value compass was formed. Then we'll take some time and look at what it means to have a value compass, what values are, how we acquire them, and maybe how they help us and how they can hurt us. And then lastly, we'll look at some specific values that are related to leadership, or maybe most commonly associated with leadership. I hope that you enjoyed this session. It'll be a brief one, but I think it's going to be valuable to you to take a moment and re-examine your moral compass.
What is a moral compass? Before we get too much further in this presentation, it's probably important to define what I'm talking about when I use the phrase moral compass. First of all, it's a generally held belief, or maybe I should say a set of beliefs. But looking at it a little bit deeper, it seems to be, at least this is what the literature indicates, that it's a feeling, and that it's natural for us to have this feeling of what's right and what's wrong. We were created with that feeling, that inner voice, you might call it. Others have referred to it as our conscience. But whatever term you use, there is an internalized set of values that we're born with, and that we develop as we grow up. Now, there really isn't a universal agreement on what values make up the moral compass. It seems to be cultural. It even seems to be somewhat generational. The things that we do today would not be acceptable 50 years ago, or maybe even longer. People walking down the street holding hands, couples holding hands before they're married. Oh my goodness. That 50 years ago, 100 years ago, would have been scandalous. I can remember my grandparents talking about that they weren't allowed to date without a chaperone being present. So things have changed quite a bit. Now kids date all the time, and they don't have chaperones present. Maybe, of course, there'd be a lot less problems if there were some chaperones present, for sure. But that's for another topic. The issue is that we all have this guiding voice that's in us. And this presentation, one of the aims of the presentation, is to look at how this guiding voice, this compass, directs our decision making. It may not be very profound to say, but everyone has a different compass. Everyone has a different set of values by which they live, or at least try to live. And while we may share some things in common with their compass, there are some things that they do that we may not feel comfortable doing. So it's important for me to know my own compass, my own values, and know them very, very well, so that I can protect myself from the people who are using a completely different compass, or maybe are totally ignoring their moral compass. We've heard these old sayings for years: birds of a feather flock together. And we're not talking about ornithology here. We're talking about people with a certain reputation. And if you hang out with that group of kids, or you hang out with that group of adults, eventually you're going to get labeled as part of that group and agreeing with what that group says or does. Another saying that kind of goes along the same lines here addresses that idea that we're known by the company we keep. So our reputation is affected by the reputation of others. And even though we may not believe what they believe, if we hang out with them, those on the outside looking in are going to say, oh, wow, he's a part of that group. So if you hang out with the people who are constantly critical, constantly negative, that nothing satisfies you, you're always upset about something, and you're hanging out with that group of people, eventually others are going to say, oh, she must be one of them because she's always with that group of people. So recognizing first that we have our own set of values is important, and that other people have different values. But it's important from the standpoint of knowing there are some people I may not want to associate very deeply because their values are not in alignment with mine. Take a look at the pictures on this slide, and from where you're sitting you may have a little difficulty seeing them, so I'll describe these pictures to you. In the top left corner you'll see a man. He's got his left hand raised and his right hand behind his back, and what you can't see is his fingers crossed. You might think, well, what is he doing? Well, with his hand raised, he's promising to tell the truth. With his hand behind his back and his fingers crossed, he's saying that what he's saying is not the truth. He's lying. The picture in the middle, there's a man with a wad of money, and he's slipping it into his pocket. Now, on the surface, that might look perfectly natural. But for our sake, we're going to say that what he's doing is he's taking money to do something that he shouldn't do. He's accepting a bribe. Then, of course, you've got the two hands, two fists full of money, which represents greed. And then the picture in the middle, the lower part, in the center of the slide, you see a robber who's pickpocketing this woman. He's stealing her wallet from her purse. Now these are all values. But why do we consider these values as unethical or unacceptable? I mean, let's face it. Who says that these values are any worse than any other values? Well, the question comes down to, Can society exist where these values, lying and corruption and greed and stealing, are commonly accepted? Absolutely not. We couldn't function if lying was the norm. We wouldn't know if anybody was serious if they said something. Or where everybody was out for themselves instead of out for the good of others. I mean, can you imagine if we lived in a greedy society, how difficult that would be? Everybody would be after his own thing, every man for himself. Or if you couldn't walk down the street without being robbed. And now I know that may be the case in some large cities in the Philippines, that you have to be very careful about being robbed. But can you imagine a country where those values were sought after? Well, I can't. I certainly wouldn't want to live in a country. These are examples of people who are not following their moral compass. These are not the values that society in general puts out as this is the way we should strive to live. These are the opposite of that. And so we have identified these values as unethical, the opposite of being a person of integrity. The values that we have come to know as good and evil and right and wrong are within us, I believe. When Adam and Eve were in the Garden of Eden, they were told that they could do anything they wanted to do, eat any fruit of any tree that they wanted except one. And notice that one tree that they couldn't eat from was the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Now, I've often pondered why God didn't want them to know the difference between good and evil. And I've come to the conclusion that God wanted to be their conscience. God wanted to be the one that was that little voice that said, don't do that, you know that's not right. Because when they ate of that tree, the fruit of that tree, you notice the first thing that happened was that they knew that they were naked and they hid themselves. They knew that to be naked in public, out in the open, is not a good thing, so they hid themselves. We have this compass in us that gets activated when we're born. And our parents are the first to help us to know the difference between right and wrong and good and evil. And then as we extend out from our parents, we have our family that help us to reinforce and learn those values that are acceptable in society, how we're supposed to treat each other. And as we get to school and are interacting with the community and society, they too help us to reinforce and develop these values. Our teachers tell us that we're supposed to be polite. We're supposed to keep our hands to ourselves. We're not supposed to hurt each other. We're supposed to tell the truth, because honesty is always the best policy. Tell the truth, because you'll never have to remember what you said. And so there become key adults in our lives that shape our values and help us to acquire the values that are acceptable in society. Of course, the church goes a long way to shaping our values and helping us to know the difference between right and wrong. Then there are experiences that we have that also help us to understand that difference between right and wrong. And we make wrong choices and suffer consequences as a result of those choices. So our moral compass is not just something that, like, we flip a switch and it comes on like a light switch. It's something that has to be activated within us, but it also is developed. So it's not necessarily just an event, it's a process that we go through as we grow. And it continues through our entire life, from the time we're born until the time that we die. A moral compass or values, using it a different way, are just guiding principles or beliefs, consistent attitudes and dispositions that we have that help us to deal with the situations we experience. They are much like a thermometer. And a thermometer just gives us information. It lets us know how warm or how cold it is outside. Now in the Philippines, it doesn't really need to go very low, and you don't really care that it's maybe 31 degrees Celsius. But here in the United States, where in some parts of the country you can get down to freezing, knowing that temperature is an important thing, because we have to dress accordingly with the temperature. If we're living in an area where they have winter, I don't live in such an area, but if I did, I would need to know if it was going to be really cold a certain day, I might want to wear a heavy jacket to stay warm. As you see in this picture here of this young lady, she's wrapped up in a very thick winter coat, and she's surrounded by snow, and she's very, very cold. A thermometer is like a moral compass because it tells us information, but it doesn't control us. We still retain freedom to follow the moral compass or ignore it, just like with the thermometer. When the thermometer tells me that it's 35 degrees Celsius, I still have the right to choose to wear a heavy jacket and a hat and long pants, blue jeans. But I'm also going to have to live with the consequences of my choice, my decision. In other words, I'm going to be hot if I'm in the Philippines. So the whole idea here is that the moral compass is a choice that I make. It tells me the information, but I still have to choose whether to follow it or to ignore it. In other words, I choose to be honest in a certain situation, or I choose to be dishonest. You see, the thermometer doesn't control us. Now, a thermostat does control, just like on your air conditioner. You can set that air conditioner in your room for a certain temperature or a certain level, and it will keep that air conditioner at that level, and it will come on and go off accordingly. So if you want to be really cool in your bedroom, you set your thermostat on your air conditioner lower so it stays on more and you're cooler. Kind of like a fan. If you have a 3 or 4 speed fan, each time you turn the knob on your fan, the fan goes faster. But it sets the fan to that speed. The fan can't go slower. It can't go faster than what that switch will allow it. But you see, a moral compass isn't like a switch, that once it's set, it's set. All it is information. We have to control ourselves and what we do with that moral or ethical information. Here are some core leadership values that I have tried to live by. I'm not going to tell you that I have lived by these all of the time, but these are certainly ones that are important to me, and they may be important to you. These are just good examples of a moral compass. So I've identified that one of them, and they're not in a particular order, so even though I've listed them here this way, they could be in a different order. But the first one is respect. Part of my moral compass is to not only respect myself, but to respect others. And I can't respect others if I don't first respect myself. Another value that's important to me is the value of making a difference. And that's where I'm having an impact on the lives around me. If I'm not making a difference where I'm at, there's no reason for me to be there. One of the reasons I continue to come to the Philippines and present workshops like this one, seminars like this one, is because I think I'm making a difference in the lives of teachers and school leaders. But if there does come a day when it looks like I'm not making a difference anymore and that what I'm doing is not important, then I'll stop, because that value of not making a difference is not part of my core values. I've got to be engaged and making a difference. Another value in a moral compass is that of integrity. And this is where my values align with my actions. And I kind of see integrity as not only a value, to be a person where what I say and do are the same thing, but I also see it as part of when you're living your life and you're following your moral compass, and they align, your life and your moral compass align, then you are a person of integrity. And so when people look at you, they say, yeah, he says that it's important to tell the truth, and he tells the truth, as an example. Another value that's part of my moral compass is authenticity. In other words, when you see me, this is who I am. I'm not living one thing in front of you and another thing when I'm at home. What you see is what you get. And while I try to be the best person I can be, I also try to be a person that is transparent and authentic. A fifth value that's important in any moral compass is that of courage. The strength to stand up in the face of adversity. You see, anybody can run away and hide, and there are certainly times when we need to run away. But it takes real courage to face criticism, to face threats, to stand up and be counted as, hey, I'm not going to behave like everybody else. Even though everyone else in the world is doing X, Y, or Z, I'm going to be true to myself. The sixth one is service. I believe that it's important for us to meet the needs of others and place their needs ahead of my own. So I sacrifice so that I can help other people. And I think that's a good value for any school leader or any leader in general, is that he puts the needs and the desires of his staff ahead of his own. Instead of being self-serving, he is looking out for the needs of his staff and those that are underneath him. Next is humility. You know, we can think a lot more highly of ourselves than we ought to. And humility is seeing yourself as you really are. As they say, warts and all. And that's having an accurate picture of ourselves. And not thinking less of ourselves than we need to. Being a doormat, which people walk all over. No, but being a person that recognizes that they're not perfect. And that they are flawed. They will make mistakes. And that's going to that part of being integrity too, is being honest with everyone around you that I haven't arrived, and not looking like I've got everything together, because truth is I don't. Lastly, a value of wisdom, and I thought this is one that I'm certainly not at yet. I'm striving to be a wise person, but wisdom being defined as the ability to balance the interest of multiple stakeholders. Boy, if that isn't true for teachers and for parents and for school leaders, we're all trying to balance what everybody wants, and you end up with three different directions to go. I was thinking of my own kids. They many times have conflicts over the same thing. They all want the same thing at the same time. And there isn't a way for all of them to have the same thing. So I have to balance their needs with everybody else's needs in the household. It's not all about them. They can't be selfish. And it takes wisdom to know who to take care of at this moment and who to make wait. It takes wisdom, and it many times takes the wisdom of Solomon to do it. You might be wondering at this point, well, how does a moral compass really help me? I mean, I know I've got one, but what does it do for me? I thought of 4 things that my moral compass does for me. First of all, it keeps a lot of peace in my life. Because you see, my moral compass helps me to not go down the wrong pathway that's taking me to a place that's not good for me, not safe for me, not something that I need to spend my time doing. In other words, it stops me from doing foolish ventures that aren't going to help me get to where I want to go with my life. It also protects me from getting into serious trouble. Boy, I've oftentimes referred to my conscience to say, this is really a bad place, and I don't need to be here, and I need to get out of here quick. It also saves me from doing things that I truly regret. I mean, there are times when I really want to yell at somebody for doing something that was wrong. But my moral compass says, you know what? Just let it go, overlook it, and don't say those words that you want to say, because you're going to regret saying them, and then you're going to have to apologize for saying them. So it does. It keeps my life very peaceful. I'm not saying my life is totally peaceful, but it certainly is a lot more peaceful because I rely on that moral compass. Secondly, it gives me a guideline, a roadmap for when life gets gray. There are times in life when things are very black and white. Stealing is wrong. I understand that. But then there's a lot more times when life is gray. And it could be right, it could be wrong. You kind of wonder. And so I was thinking of a situation like that. About a year or so ago, my wife and kids, we were at MacDo in our hometown of Dothan. And we had gotten to a table, and the people had not cleaned off the table yet. So I kind of pushed the tray to the side, and there was a white envelope on the table. I thought, that's interesting. And I was about to pick it up and put it in the trash when I realized there was something in this envelope. So I opened the envelope, and sure enough, inside there was $1,400. $1,400. So that's about maybe 60,000, 70,000 pesos. And I thought about it, and I thought, wow, what should I do? Nobody was around. I mean, there wasn't anybody there. The person who left it wasn't there. And I had, for a moment, maybe it seemed longer, but for a moment I thought, wow, I could really use $1,400. I really could. But then my moral compass reminded me that it wasn't mine. I didn't own it. I didn't earn it. I found it, yes. But that money belonged to somebody. And I suspect that they will eventually miss that envelope and will come back looking for it. Now, I can turn it in to the people at the restaurant, MacDo, and they'll hold it for somebody. But then I thought, we're here. I'm just going to hang on to it for a few minutes and see if the person comes back. And about a half hour later, somebody came, and they were looking around, and they came up to us and they said, did you see a white envelope on the table over here? And I said, you mean this envelope? And you could see the wave of relief come across this lady's mind and face, because I said, yeah, here it is. And she said, I just cashed my paycheck, and I had just come from the bank, stopped at McDonald's to eat, and I laid the envelope with my pay in it on the table here and forgot to put it in my purse. She said, it's my whole month's pay, and I really need that money. She said, thank you so much for not taking it and going away with it. So, yeah, it helps me get through those gray areas. the other thing is that following your moral compass can make up for shortcomings. On one of my first trips to the Philippines, a friend of mine and I were walking in downtown Manila, and we were trying to get to Chinatown, because it's a very beautiful part of Manila, or Metro Manila. And he's married to a Filipina and had been to Manila many times, and at that point, this was my wife and I's first trip to the Philippines, so we didn't know much of anything. But we got turned around, we got lost, and we got into a part of the downtown area that nobody should be that's not from the Philippines. It was one of those areas. It looked like a real rough area. And finally, my friend admitted that he was lost. And I thought, well, we need to get directions. So we went up to this guy. He was looking kind of out of his apartment door. And in my English, and hopefully, and I knew he didn't speak much English at all, I said to him, smiling, I said, "Sir, we're Americans, we're lost, we're trying to get to Chinatown. Can you point us in the right direction?" And he smiled, "Oh, American, Joe, okay." And he directed us, and we got to Chinatown. You see, he was very willing to help us because we were being polite. We recognized that we didn't speak the language, we didn't know where we were, and that we needed to be courteous in order for him to help. Because you see, if I was rude and overbearing, this guy is going to tell me to go the wrong way, and I'm really going to be in a world of hurt. So sometimes following your moral compass can make up for the things you don't have, the shortcomings, the mistakes that you made. And we made a big mistake that day. Lastly, a moral compass can protect us, because you see, it helps us to set boundaries. And when someone is being mean to me and talking to me in a way that I don't think is appropriate, my moral compass says, wait a minute, I have self-respect, and I'm not going to let anybody talk to me this way, because I'm not going to try to talk to others this way. I don't want them talking to me this way. So it can protect me from being beat up and or abused by other people. Since a moral compass can definitely help me, is there a time when a moral compass can hurt me or make my life a little bit more difficult? Absolutely. I think, though, that it's a difference between short-term and long-term. Yes, there are short-term instances where there are going to be certain things, projects, activities, friendships, and partnerships that I cannot be a part of. I have a person that I am very fond of, and I like him as a friend. But my moral compass and his are not in alignment. And his friendship is a problem for me, because he wants to do things that I just can't do. He wants to go to certain types of nightclubs and clubs, gentlemen's clubs, that I cannot go into and don't want to go into. And so I have come to the conclusion that in this short term, I cannot associate with him. Now, it doesn't mean I'm not friendly to him when I see him and when I talk to him, but I know that I can't associate with him, and I've kind of broken off that association so that I'm not in conflict. So yeah, in the short term, it hurts because I really like this guy. He's a lot of fun to be around. He's very generous. He's very compassionate. But he also goes to places that I don't think I need to be. As a married man, I don't need to be in those kinds of places. So, and doing those kinds of activities. So yeah, in the short term, it does. And in the short term, it might cost me business, because there are certain people I can't do business with. And yeah, I'm going to miss out on their money that they would send me for working with. I can think of several organizations that I cannot speak at their events because of the way they operate their business. It's not consistent with who I am. And I don't want my reputation affected by how they run their business. So, short term, can't associate with them. But let's not stop with the short term. Let's look at the long term. The benefits of being a person of integrity, the benefits of a person following their moral compass will result in positive relationships, the right relationships, and they will far outweigh what I had to give up. So in the long term, as a person of integrity, I know that I will be rewarded for the stands that I have taken against immorality, and I will get other business that I hadn't even considered getting because I'm a person of integrity. So it can hurt me, but in the long run, we've got to look at the big picture. It can help me more. Just like a thermometer, if you don't read it, it doesn't do you any good. If you don't read your moral compass, it really doesn't help you. And this is a mistake that some executives and leaders make, is that they don't look at their moral compass and consider how their moral compass is going to affect the decisions that they make. So you see, when I read my moral compass, I have to understand how my values might affect a decision I'm about to make. When I found the money at the McDonald's, I had to think for a moment, what do I value? I value honesty and integrity. Well, if those things are important to me, then I want to be a person of honesty, and I would appreciate if I had left money on the table, a large sum of money. I would certainly want somebody to be a person of integrity, and that happened on my way back from the Philippines this year. I was taking a taxi from the airport in Atlanta, Georgia, to my hotel because I had a flight the next day. And in my exhaustion, 34 hours of flying from Manila to Atlanta, I left my wallet on the seat of the taxi. Well, that's a problem, because when I got to the hotel, the room was paid for, and I had my ID, but I also needed the credit cards I had and these other things. I was stressed because I thought, oh great, someone's going to find my credit cards, they're going to go spend up thousands of dollars on them, and I'm going to have to pay for it. Well, I prayed that night that the person who drove the cab would be a person of integrity. And my prayer was answered, because the next day I got a phone call from the front desk. And she said that, did I lose my wallet? I said, yes, I did. And she said, well, I've got the taxi driver. He found it this morning when he got out to his car. He saw it sitting on the seat. And he knew where he had dropped you off. And so he called the hotel. And he was going to bring it to me. Of course, I was very happy to give him a good tip for taking care of me that way. So I have the feeling that because I was a person of honesty in returning that lady's money to her, this taxi driver repaid me in the long term for that honesty. Had I kept the money, maybe I wouldn't have gotten my wallet back when I needed it. You see, I have to read my compass to make those decisions. Now, I couldn't have known when I found that money at McDonald's that I was going to lose my wallet in Atlanta more than a year later. But what I am saying is that we have to look at the moral compass every time we make a decision, because those decisions do have repercussions. They do have effects on other decisions. Now, as I've said, just like a thermometer, it doesn't do us any good if we don't look at it once in a while. And that's why we need to, as we're about to make decisions, to look at what we believe and make sure that our decision is in alignment with our values. Why would people choose not to look at their moral compass, or why would even they go so far as violating their moral compass? Well, I've thought of three things that might cause someone to violate their moral compass. And the first one is what I call the fear of conflict. It's the reason why some leaders will remind everybody on staff about a rule that's being broken, even though the rule is being broken by 2 or 3 people. They tell everybody about it and say, all of you need to stop breaking this rule, when they know there's only 2 or 3 people. Well, why do they do that? They do it because they don't want to have to deal with the conflict of those 2 or 3 people who are not following the rules. We call those challenging side effects. So that may be a reason why they choose to not just go and deal with the problem and hold everybody to the same standard. A second reason may be that it's what I call the right versus right reason, where some leaders have difficulty choosing between 2 values that are both right. For example, let's say that you have a teacher in your school, and for whatever reason, her husband either left the family or is passed away. And she has the responsibility of taking care of the children and providing for them. And so, it comes to your attention that she's not doing everything that she's supposed to be doing. She has responsibilities at school that she's not fulfilling like everybody else. She's not coming to work on time. She's maybe not prepared for her classes like she should be. Well, you understand her condition. And so part of you values family. You want to help this lady out. You understand how hard it is for her. She is both mother and father to a family of kids, and she's having to provide for them. But then the other part of you remembers that that's not fair to the rest of the staff, where she's being allowed to leave early maybe, and they're not, because she's got to get to pick her kids up. And so there is the conflict between the needs of this one teacher and the needs of the many, the fairness to the entire group. So it can be very hard to follow your moral compass in some cases when you have competing values to deal with. There's also the short-term benefit that may come from not following your values. Yep, there are times when doing the opposite, in other words, something that's opposite of your values, might result in personal gains. Ooh, you might make money. It's a political decision, I grant you. But there are some people that will sacrifice their values to make money for themselves and do it unethically because they know, wow, in the short term, I might not get caught. I was talking with a colleague just yesterday, and she was telling about a friend that she knew of, or someone that she knew of, and this person was a ship captain, and he traveled all over the world, and he encountered a young woman who evidently was connected to smuggling drugs. And he had recently lost his wife after a long bout with cancer. So he was kind of at a vulnerable state when he met this woman. The short version of the story is that she convinced him to smuggle drugs into the United States. This is not something that he would have done. It was contrary to his moral compass, but for whatever reason, it was a moment of weakness, he did it. He got caught. He could see the short-term benefits of doing this. He was going to make a lot of money from embezzling this or bringing these drugs into the country. Now, before he would go to prison, he committed suicide over this situation. Maybe he was embarrassed, I don't know. But there are times when people will do things that they would not normally do because of the benefits. And they can have disastrous consequences. And for this guy, it was disastrous. He ended up taking his own life over that embarrassing situation of getting caught and facing jail time. So there are people who will violate their moral compass for lots of reasons, but here are just three that I've mentioned: the fear of conflict, having to decide between two values that are both good values, right values, and then the short-term benefits reason.
For the past few minutes, we've been looking at the values that guide leadership. I call it a moral compass. That's what the literature refers to it. And most commonly, you hear people talk about their moral compass, or so-and-so doesn't have a moral compass, isn't following their moral compass. We began the presentation by defining the idea of a moral compass. What is it? We also defined values as those general principles that guide our lives. We also talked about how our compass is formed and that it starts at birth. And I even referenced Adam and Eve didn't have a moral compass. God was their moral compass until they ate from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And then they had an activated compass, and they had to look at their compass to make the right decision from that point on. And humanity has had to look at the values that we say are important and then live our lives accordingly. And we know examples of people who don't do that, who are corrupt, who violate the law, who aren't people of integrity. They're not ethical people. And all that means is they're not following the moral compass that they have, that they know is the right thing to do. They know the difference between good and evil and right and wrong. This session really has just given you a chance to think back on your moral compass. And I would encourage you, on your way home from this conference, to think about the values that you say are the most important values in your life. Write them down. I mean, don't just rely on your memories. Oh yeah, I know, I believe that, I value that. Write them down in a list, as I did in the presentation. And make sure that you look at that list periodically to say, these are the values that I say are important. And then take an inventory to be sure that the decisions you have made, as well as the decisions you're about to make, are in a line with that moral compass. If you do, you will be a person of integrity. And that's what we all want to be. That's what the schools need, are people of integrity running them. Now, you can contact me personally. I'd love to hear from you. And you can reach me at the address on the next slide, which will give you my contact information. Thank you.
And this brings us to the close of this session here. You can contact me at Troy University, attention Dr. Rodney Davis, P.O. Box 8368, Dothan, Alabama 36303, United States of America. My email address is davisr@troy.edu. Again, that's davisr@troy.edu. I've enjoyed being with you in Palawan, and I look forward to a time when we can meet face to face. Take care.